specifically by the Tarbiyyat department, and that is the moral training department of our youth here in the USA. This is a 5-program series, as most of you would be aware of now, but if you're joining us for the first time, today we'll be talking about public policy reform. And this is in line with all the other conversations we've been having as far as race relations are concerned here in the United States and of course around the world. We begin our program with a recitation from the Holy Quran, and I would invite Talha Ahmed Sahib to please recite a verse of the Holy Quran with English translation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله يأمركم أن تؤدوا الأمانات إلى أهلها وإذا حكمتم بين الناس أن تحكموا بالعدل إن الله نعم ما يعظكم به إن الله كان سميعا بصيرا. The verse I just recited was from Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 59. Verily, Allah commands you to make over the trust to those entitled to them, and that when you judge between men, you judge with justice. And surely excellent is that which Allah admonishes you. Allah is all-hearing, all-seeing.
Jazakallah, and I'll request Brother Najee to tell you how you can participate in the program as well. Najee, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah Rabbi Sahib. Just to be real brief, and I'll be real quick, just to go over how the technical notes for today's session and how to participate. Again, as we've been doing, it's best when these sessions are conversation and they're interactive. So all Khudam brothers are requested to participate as they would like during the session via the chat box. To access the chat box, you'll look at the bottom left side of your screen. You'll see a speech bubble. You can click it and then direct your messages from the right-hand side from the chat box to our team, and we'll filter the conversation and filter the questions into the conversation as appropriate. One point to note is that I just humbly request that anyone with questions, please direct your questions to Abdullah Dibba, respected Rabbi Sahib, whose username is Abdullah Dibba, on the side. He can factor it in as he'll be moderating the conversation. The last technical note to give to everybody is that for us, it'll be easier to moderate if everyone keeps their videos off, except for our respected panelists. Otherwise, we'll have to manually turn your video off. So Jazakallah to everyone for coming, and those are the end of the technical notes, and I'll hand it back over to you, Rabbi Sahib.
Jazakallah. And as I said earlier, today we'll be talking about public policy reform. And this is one of the 5 topics that we've chosen as far as discussions and conversations about race relations is concerned. We know what fired up this conversation really, even though it's been going on for many, many decades. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community has not been silent about this, but recently the very unjust murder of George Floyd by some police officers has began a conversation across the nation, across the world. And we're here to hold these conversations and how to really educate one another, and also to take part as far as bringing about reform is concerned. And how to do that, we've got very beautiful, straightforward guidelines from Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, the supreme head of the worldwide Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And one of the points that he has raised that made today's program a very special program is, and he says in point number 11, for generations, Black people or other minorities have sought to get their rights through marches and protests, but it has not led to systemic changes. Hazur says, thus, Ahmadis should recognize that true success will be achieved through following principles of Islamic teachings and not by following the latest political trends. And then he says, as Khalifatul Masih says, consequently, in accordance to Islam, our campaigns and efforts should be focused on ensuring that Black people and other minorities take part fully in all democratic processes and they focus on being represented in all levels of government, law enforcement, and other sectors so that real change can occur. So as I said before, Huzur acknowledges the problems, and then he tells us for real change to take place, we really need to go back and in a democratic way, in a civic way, to make sure that we all take part in it. And in the beginning of the series, we talked about the history of Black people in this country and other minorities. We talked about, the experience of African-American Ahmadis in America. We talked about, unconscious bias in the third program, and how we can all individually try within our homes, within our own consciousness, in our minds, can try to not be part of the problem, right? And how we can change ourselves to make sure that we make everyone else around us comfortable, and we are sensitive to each other's challenges and each other's problems. Today is about now how all of us can come together individually, collectively, and take part in really bringing about a change, not just being driven by our emotions, but also taking effective steps in bringing about change. And we have a very qualified team today with us, our panelists. The first I would like to introduce, in no particular order, is Abdul Latif Balanta Saib, who is in Baltimore. He is an attorney by profession. He's a lawyer. He's a convert into the Ahmadiyya Muslim community himself, many years now. Personal friend of mine, very passionate when it comes to his work, and a lot of people that he's exposed to in his line of work when it comes to racial issues, and when it comes to establishing justice as a profession, as a person, and most importantly, as a member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. So I'd like to welcome you, Abdul Latif Bennett Saab. And we also have a local politician who's here with us, who has served in Jamaat as Sadr Majlis 1999 to 2002, and that is Shukoor Nabeela. So he's had leadership roles both within the Jamaat, Khudam al-Ahmadiyya, nationally as well, National Public Relations Secretary. He's worked with different organizations when it comes to different issues that the Jamaat takes part in. As a profession, he's a technology entrepreneur for about 2 years, and he did his master's in public policy as well from American University. So these are the two gentlemen. And thirdly, we'll later be joined by qasimrashid, who's also an attorney. And presently, he's a candidate. He just won his primaries not long ago, Democratic candidate in Virginia, who will join us later in the day. So gentlemen, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to today's very important program. And as I said, this is when now we're telling everyone, all viewers and those at home, they can extend this message to. And how do we really be a part of the change, long-term and more consistently? And I'll start with you, Abdul Latif Bennett Balanta Saab. Now, we're talking about systemic racism, systemic injustice. But we also know that the judicial system is something that is important in any society. We draw a sort of a relationship between, if there is any form of, systemic racism and the judicial system of a country or a place. What could be the relationship between these two, if it's toxic?
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. There is a definite relationship between systemic racism and the American judicial system. The theory behind the judicial system is such that one is supposed to be subject to a jury of his peers. He's not supposed to be stopped and searched unreasonably. All of these are constitutional protections that are built into the system. But in practice, in reality, the system allows such racial prejudicial determinations, and it does nothing to correct those or to amend those, but rather it just feeds into that. For instance, if we could just imagine that if George Floyd had survived that encounter with that white police officer, and he would like to raise police misconduct or false arrest charges against the police officer, then the system would have made it such that the system is stacked against him. First of all, the police report that the police fill out, it would have been informed by a team of attorneys knowing that they have something to hide, one of the first things the police officers do whenever there's a shooting or an altercation or allegations against them is that as soon as they get to the police station, they call their union attorney. So here we got an unequal system already. You got George Floyd, just his word against us, the police officer. The next thing is that the police report, it did not and it would not have included the witnesses who were there on the scene. Those people would have bared out George Floyd's testimony, but George is responsible for building his own case of innocence. But the system is supposed to be that he's supposed to gather witnesses that just let the chips fall where they may. Very, very briefly, when it goes to court, if it was to go to court, the charges that George Floyd would have raised against the police officer, they would have been subject to internal investigation by IA, Internal Affairs. And this is the police monitoring and supposed to be policing the police. That is a system that does not work, but it's designed like that on this kind of honor system where the police are supposed to say that, yes, we find our own doing police misconduct. When it goes to court, it's George Floyd's word against the white police officer. Police officers are notorious for lying. And again, when you go to a system like this, you've got the corroborated statement of the police by 3 other police officers who can say that, yes, George Floyd resisted arrest, and yes, he did assault the policeman. The beauty of what we have now is the video, which belies most of these things. But the idea of the system, it allows that one individual citizen, his word is against the whole judicial system. And then finally, the prosecutor, who's supposed to be representing the interests of justice, not just the police's version of it, he is pally-pally with the judge because he goes before the judge every day. Again, this is a system where it allows an unfavorable, unequal kind of relationship in the litigation of justice. And there are many other examples, but
wow, so
I'll leave it here.
I'm really amazed by the way you've laid it all down. I'm sure a lot of people are listening and saying, wow. And if this was me, the way you just broke it down, in all the privileges that a police officer has, in a system that say, okay, it's good that they set something up, right? All on one side is all these systems. And as you said in the end as well, that these are trained people who probably have some sort of relationship with the judges and whatnot, with the court system, what to say,
No doubt.
how to present it. But if you could just tell us, okay, on the side of George Floyd, or somebody whose word is against the word of the police and that whole system, what do they have to even stand a chance? We all know that people say, okay, go and hire a lawyer. But what does somebody like George Floyd or somebody like me have, against such a system to have any chance?
His best hope is most likelihood he couldn't afford professional or outside legal counsel. His best hope is that public defender. The public defender has 50 to 80 cases that he's going to try during that week. George Floyd is but one of them. He's not necessarily able to send out his investigator on one case when he has all of these other cases to try. And then it goes back to the jury system. You're still entitled to be found innocent or not by a jury of your peers. And in big cities, in sophisticated cities where crime is rampant and the people know how the police operate, the jury of his peers is his best hope that the attorney can explain what really went down and show what the video does not necessarily always say.
Right. So and I know, like people have been living in America for decades and decades without videos. So so now the videos have given such people maybe a chance to say, well, you know what, this is my story. Imagine how many people had to face a system like that without anything on their side, really, without even a video. I mean, that must have been. But anyway, we'll go into more details. I'm just amazed by the way you broke everything down here. I'm sure the viewers must be also thinking, wow, those were not familiar with it. But Shukoor Saab, another aspect of this, and yourself as a local politician, another aspect of this is, elected officials or people in authority. Even judges are voted, for the elections take place for judges and stuff like that. Now, when we talk about the presidential elections, it's all over the media, and, we know the candidates, we are familiar with them. Sometimes people think it's only important to vote in those. But tell us a little bit about local elections. Something as simple as that. Just taking part in local elections and the people that are within our constituents. Just give us some sort of a highlight.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Imam Saab. A lot of people kind of completely forget about the role local city government or this Board of Education does. Because if you look at it, I live in a county, which is Prince George's County. It's about 1 million people. And the city I live in is Bowie. So people don't realize the local school board member and the local city council mayor plays a key role because, particularly when the government is very close, that's where they actually make a big difference. If you look at the nationally part, electing a president, electing a US senator and how the delegates is great. But it's very important, when we go and look at where we want to live, most of the people who are in the group, the Damalamdia group until age 40 have children. And one of the major things for them is, are the schools better in those areas? And when you look at that part, then the school board comes in, and it's very crucial to have have a good school board member and be active in the school system, because in my county, our county's budget is about $3 billion. $2 billion goes to school system. So it's very crucial to have a good school board member. And I think that's where the quality of life really comes down to, because of local stuff, local part, the city level, the school board level, the county level you live in. So it's very crucial to take active part. And I think nationally it's good, but I think, I would say that local races and local participating in the local process is much better. And you can also have a little bit of a better impact, because when you go and vote in the city elections, you probably live in a town of over 10,000 people, about 2,000 people show up, and an active participation in that part can build a good relationship with the local mayor and local school board members. So I think that's very crucial for us, particularly immigrants. And, and also people who are minority, African American, because the school system determines how well the person would do when they graduate out of school, go to college, and the quality of life.
So yourself, I know in 1998, we were talking earlier, you talked about how you ran for office, back in the day, as we would say, being brown, being a Muslim minority, hands down. What was your experience kind of like? You seeing yourself out there trying to hold a position and make a difference. I'm sure it must have been a very interesting experience.
Yeah, well, 98 was a little bit different because now you have social media, right? So there was no social media at that time. And I guess when I ran, there was a bombing happened in Kenya and East Africa in 1998, just before the election. So for a couple of days, I was a little bit worried. And I think what I noticed is when I ran, I was in a district which is about 60% white and 40% black. And the entire delegation was white. So I kind of felt, and I felt in the campaigning part that a lot of time, most state legislators do not take the time to go out and door knock. And the door knocking experience was great, because when I began door knocking, I was able to introduce myself, and I saw that I was able to sway a lot of black voters on my side, because some of the legislators who were there never really took the time to go out and took it for granted. So that campaign was a little bit, obviously I was here for about 10 years, and it was kind of a little bit challenging. Right. But again, it's I think over the time it got a little bit easier. And right. Sometimes you run into people who are not going to vote for you, but it's really a number game at the end. You want to be able to get at least if you go to 10 homes, as long as 6 people are voting for you, you're fine.
So what you're telling us is from the stats, people aren't voting because whether it is people think locally doesn't matter, or only national matters, or sometimes people don't even trust the system. So people aren't voting is essentially what you're saying. But Bennett Saab, not everyone is in that category, right? When you look at the stats, we know that some, the big parts of some populations are, in terms of let's say, mostly white people vote more than other races, right? Black people have a lot of challenges when it comes to participating in elections and in decision-making processes. And we know that there were times for a long time where Black people couldn't vote. But now, as far as the challenges that minorities and Black people face with this judicial system, could you highlight some of those challenges? Bennett, can you, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have the most advanced judicial system in the world, and the presumptions and the checks and balances that are designed in it are the most advanced, most state-of-the-art, and most likely to lead to a just outcome. However, the way that they are implemented, and it is in the practice, which allows for the insertion of prejudices, both unintentional, unconscious, as well as conscious biases, which makes for an unjust outcome. If you think about the challenges that African Americans are facing, most of them stem from the very first contact with the introduction with the criminal justice system. That is, they're stopped and they're frisked and they're checked more often just because of the profiling, which is also a part of the system. This says that the police believe that this is a high crime area, and it is more likely in his mind that this person who is walking, or in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, jogging, may be running away. This is part of the justification that the police actually make when they shoot an individual. They believe in their mind and in the police reports that they were shooting a fleeing suspect, and they always cite an actual crime that was actual afoot, or a suspect that they were actually looking for. Now, what that does is that undercuts the presumption of innocence, which is supposed to be a part of the system. If you can shoot a fleeing person in the back and then explain it later on that you were trying to apprehend a real dangerous felon or a real fleeing suspect, then the system doesn't work. And it always comes down heavily on the backs of the African American. The other parts where it is very difficult for the Black man in this country is when he goes to court. We spoke about how the deck is stacked against him there, but even if he is found guilty, then the statistics bear out that African Americans are sentenced much more harshly than their white counterparts for the same crime. And it is not just based upon their records, but it is based upon the perception that money judges have that they're taking a menace to society off of the streets. It is also inherent in some of the sentencing guidelines that judges must adhere to. A lot of people don't know that in many cases, judges only have a certain amount of discretion. And this goes back to the legislature, the local legislature, that says that we are going to clamp down on this class of drugs, for instance. But when they do those class of drugs, sometimes crack, which was a class 1 narcotic, is treated much more lightly than cocaine, which is used by much more affluent people. So again, whenever you're asked to design your own judicial system, if you got more whites participating in it, it's inherent that they're going to be much more hard upon those that they believe is the problem with society.
So Shukoor Saab, this has a lot to do with policy, right? But then we have the people that are going to be in office to ensure that the right policies are put in place, right? You have candidates who come out and say, well, I stand for this party and our policies are this and that. Or an individual candidate can be passionate about one thing when it comes to, addressing certain problems, and another candidate may have a different approach. Now, identifying the right candidates, and again, when we say nationally, we know the Democrats and the Republicans, we are familiar with some of the policies, but when it comes to, reform in the different states and different cities and so on and so forth, now, a lot of people may not understand how to even identify the right policies, how to even identify the right individuals that we can vote for. If today everyone on this call decided to say, you know what, I'll take part in the election, how do they know how to identify the right person or to even know who has the right policies? Just to give us a little bit of an insight as a politician.
I think what's happening is for quite some time, there were a lot of local newspapers. So a lot of local newspapers are disappearing in America because of the fact they're not able to sustain themselves. So local newspapers have played a key role in identifying the races and sharing some information about having a profile of the candidate and providing some description about the candidate. But if you really do not have a local newspaper and you're really not sure about who you should vote for, there's a website called VoteSmart, VoteSmart.org. VoteSmart.org, all you have to do is plug in your zip code and it will tell you exactly who are the candidates running in the district, right? And basically they kind of rank them based on their votes in the legislature. And also for candidates, they have a questionnaire. So they probably would gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of how you look at it. It also depends on how we individually look at each candidate. Some people are very conservative, some people are very liberal or progressive. So I think there are individual choices there, and generally people who are serving are human beings. They're not perfect people. So we have to also keep in mind that we're not going to be able to pick somebody who's never going to work, who's never going to vote on the legislation exactly what you would want. So there would be a lot of compromises. So I think at some point you have to look at it that there are competing interests when they're voting on the legislation. Sometimes you may not get what you want. So for example, if you want to eliminate complete tax and the tax is 5% and the person can go and reduce it to 3%, you should be happy with that. So that's what I would do. And that's the way people should make a decision. And in some cases, you could even contact them through an email, because most local races, people will respond back to your email.
So one of the policies that people have said is, Balanta, one of the things that are out there, a lot of Black people are talking about this, is defunding the police. And some people think it's a radical step. People highly misunderstand it, I would say. It sounds like a controversial term. Could you tell us what does defunding the police mean? And I'm not saying if you support it or not, just what it means, just so everyone understands.
Yes. Yeah, I think that the concept of defunding the police, it sounds as if they want to, excuse me, abolish the police force and take all of their funding for them. But I think probably the more prudent course that they intend, and that if there is going to be a reform will actually happen, is that they take some funds that are otherwise dedicated toward policing, arresting, incarcerating, and they dedicate those funds toward programs which is designed to divert people from the criminal justice system, designed to provide counseling for them. The police right now are really like the catch-all for all problems that go on in the community. I don't defend them, but if there is a domestic altercation between a husband and a wife, then the police are called, and they are not trained in mediation and in dispute resolution. Their goal is to apprehend, arrest, and in fact, they are encouraged to make more arrests. So the determinations and the calls that they're going to make when they're sent out is not such that they're going to look and see if there's a real danger or not. They're just going to see if there's a justifiable, what's called probable cause to make an arrest. And an upset lady may get her husband arrested. I'm not saying that the police may not be protecting that woman from actual harm in some instances, but if you want to stem the tide of the mass incarceration of African American or people in general, when there is an issue which could be de-escalated, then it is best to send those kind of people who have such training in counseling, who have psychological kinds of training, the people who can deal with the children who are quite often the victims in these instances. You also have to bear in mind that sometimes the children are caught up in this thing and they are sent to foster homes simply because there is supposedly violence in the household. And community programs can do a lot to intervene, interfere, interrupt this kind of disruption, and not use the criminal justice system to reform and to help a society that needs help in other kind of ways.
As Islam says it itself, reformation is the goal here. So whatever steps are taken, reformation has to be the intent. So we have a brother qasimrashid, who's also one of our panelists. Qasim, we're talking about policies, we're talking about possible reform and how to participate in that. Now, looking at the current system, the judicial system in the United States, in order for any chance for Black people to be treated the same as other races, what needs to change, in your opinion? What's that one thing that, if it changed, there's a chance of equal treatment?
Well, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. I hesitate to say there's a single silver bullet, because the problem is so multifaceted. There's so many different influences impacting the injustices that we're seeing right now, that there's no one thing that can magically solve all of it. I mean, I think, from the Islamic standpoint, the easy answer is taqwa, right? There needs to be God consciousness and a sense of fear of God in how these sentences are being distributed, or how these policies are being implemented. But I think one of the things that I would seek with urgency, a few things, is one, from a voting perspective. One of the really harms done is that once you've been convicted of a crime or sentenced, you lose your right to vote in many parts of this country. Many states have completely disenfranchised voters. And so if you have a policy that disproportionately targets Black and Hispanic people, then now you have that many fewer Black and Hispanic people voting on a consistent basis. They're completely disenfranchised. And so then you have policies being made that impact Black and Hispanic communities, and they have no say in those policies. So of course it's going to be unjust. So one way to resolve that is to remove that ban on voting and make sure that every person has a right to vote. And many Western countries, many developed democracies do this. In fact, this ban on voting for felons wasn't even part of the founding of our nation. Despite all the injustices, even then felons were allowed to vote. This didn't get implemented until about 50 to 70 years after the founding of this country. So if it can be added, it can certainly be taken away. But then the other aspect of it, I think, that is really crucial, that we need to pay closer attention to, is when we talk about police reform, that reform has to be reflective of the legislation. And so what I mean by that is, right now, there is this war on drugs that was touted in the 80s and 90s as the way that we're going to clean up the streets. But what ended up happening, and I'm sure my dear brother Abdul Bennett has talked about this at length, is that it was just an excuse to further target Black and brown communities. And the real damage done now wasn't just that you had these communities destroyed by drugs, but then you had oftentimes people that could be reformed with non-violent, non-punitive means having their lives destroyed as well. And you had the real issues of addiction being treated as a crime rather than an illness. And so it didn't actually solve anything. Imam Sahib, as you just mentioned a moment ago, from an Islamic perspective, our obligation is not to forgive or punish, but is to reform. And so you had those who maybe were a first-time offender, or even a second or third-time offender of a non-lethal amount of drugs, now have their entire life destroyed. And then you also had folks who were struggling with actual addiction and needing hospitalization and rehabilitation and treatment and compassion, and they were met with even more force and violence and having their lives destroyed. So they didn't actually heal or get any better. And so then after they spent their time in prison and got out, they went back to the same life again, right, because addiction is a disease. And so the second thing I would say is stop this war on drugs. Treat addiction like the illness that it actually is, and provide actual resources. And then the third thing I'll say is that we need to break the school to prison pipeline. And you do that by funding education, paying teachers a proper living wage, making sure that children at a young age have early intervention and are able to get on a meaningful path with mentors, with leaders, so that they don't have any opportunity or a limited opportunity to get into the prison system. Part of that is shutting down the private prison industry, but part of it also is supporting children early on. This is why within the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, our khulafa have guided us to start teaching your children at a very early age, at a very young age, even before they can walk and talk and speak, because that tarbiyyat is crucial to their later on development. And right now we have communities with broken homes and broken societies, not due to any misintent on their own part, but due to a criminal justice system that is more focused on locking people up and punishing people than providing them the support that they need to live their full lives.
So we also have Salam Bhatti, who is a lobbyist actually. And Salam, you know, Assalamu alaikum, are you with us, Salam Bhatti?
Hey, Assalamu alaikum, yes, I'm here.
Yeah, so, you know, these policies sound so fantastic. And I'm sure everyone listening to them would be like, of course, who would disagree with these, right? And I'm sure there are very good people out there, very good candidates out there with fantastic ideas. But when I'm sitting in my home, how do I have access to these? How do I know who has what policy, what, you know? Like, just give us a little bit of what you do as a lobbyist and you know, to kind of guide us.
Yeah, sure. So as Shukoor was saying earlier, that there's so many great resources available in case you don't know who your lawmaker is. And a lot of people don't know that city council and the state legislative assemblies exist. So many laws happen on city and state levels. And because a lot of people don't know that they exist, a lot of people don't reach out to those lawmakers. And so they are left doing work with the input of very few people. So if you call them, if you organize with friends and family members to push for policy that you want to see implemented, you could very likely see those things not just get passed, or at least get discussed on the state or city floor. This is something that's very accessible. These lawmakers are very accessible via phone, email, especially these days, Zoom even. I mean, the sky's the limit, and a lot of people don't take advantage of it.
So yeah, so I think we'll highly encourage that, you know, everyone here begins to be, you know, take steps towards these things. You know, Qasim, people do say that, well, of course, you know, politicians will just come and say fancy things. But we know at the end of the day that, you know, we know that it's going to get rigged or they have some hidden hands that control who wins and who doesn't win. What's the point of even taking part? People who don't trust the system, what do you have? I mean, you yourself, you're running for office, for Congress, right? If somebody tells you they don't trust the system, I'm sure you most probably face questions like that. How do you deal with that? I mean, what answer do you have for them?
Well, I think that people have, based on their experience, seen so much corruption that they're right to have skepticism. And I can't tell them that you shouldn't be skeptical or you should just, you know, trust the system blindly. I think on the contrary, you should recognize that there are bad people and there are also good people. You can't just blanket, you know, over every single person out there. If we look at the example of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, what the Quran tells us is that ultimately, when we talk about leadership, when those people are elected, we make those trusts over to them and we support them in everything that is good and we oppose the actions which are evil. And the obligation of those in power is to take mashwara, to take consultation from their constituents, from their communities, and then act with taqwa, with the best possible manner going forward. Now, you know, some people may not think taqwa is a priority, and they may not think being God consciousness is a priority, and that's fine for them. But for you, as your obligations are concerned, you still must do your best to serve your community, to be a subject of this society, to live in this society. It's, I believe, an obligation, and this is what Khalifa al-Masih has encouraged us repeatedly to vote. It's an obligation to be involved, to be engaged, because at the end of the day, it is our responsibility to serve all humanity. And that manifests in multiple different forms. Maybe you want to be a tech, a business venture entrepreneur like our dear Shukoor Bhai, and be successful by serving a community in their technological needs and creating jobs and giving people a livelihood. That's a wonderful, beautiful, powerful way to serve humanity. Maybe you want to be a lawyer like Abdul Bennett side and protect people's rights and help people be made whole. That's a way of serving. Maybe you want to be a lobbyist for food access like Salam Bhatti side and make sure people have enough to eat. These are all ways to do so. But I assure you that Shukoor Bhai will tell you that within the tech community, there's corruption. Abdul Dibba will tell you that within the legal community, there's corruption. Salam Bhatti sahib will tell you that within lobbying, there's corruption. But that doesn't mean we just forsake those and say, we're not gonna do it anymore. It means we get involved and we show how it's done. That's the beauty of this Jamaat. That's what we're called to do. That you are the best of people raised for the good of mankind. You repel what is evil and you enjoin what is good. So I would just simply say this, Imam Sahib, that despite the skepticism, Recognize that you have been given a gift and an opportunity and the blessings of Khalifatul Masih to go out and show the world how it's done by upholding justice as a supreme standard and making sure that every person in your circle of influence has their rights that are protected. And if you do it the right way, then there's no reason why you can't be the next Dr. Abdul Salam or the next Hazrat Muhammad Dibba. These are the secular ambitions that we've been shown in our own Jamaat that we should aspire to. And I don't think that there should be any level of skepticism of the next Tifl, the next Khadim, next Lajna member achieving these phenomenal results.
And I'm sure, like, just to remind all of you, if you're joining us late, we're talking about public policy reform, right? And how we can be part of the solution. Now, this is one of the most important programs in the series that we're discussing. It's time for solutions, right? And these things have worked, where people have been affected real time. And, you know, people got up and took part in the decision making. And as Shukoor Bhai, yourself, you know, members of your family have ran for office. And you just give us an example of a success story in your area as far as, you know, policy reform is concerned, and how it's affected minorities or even Black people in your area. Shukoor.
Look, piggybacking on what Qasim said, Qasim is in a tough district. And I think what people are looking for is some sort of authenticity in leaders. So I think even though he's in a tough district, he's been able to perform so well. And hopefully he might pull a win in November. And so I guess back to that part, I think people are looking for authentic leaders. So I think sometimes we don't necessarily, if you look at the whole landscape in the US, people just love Bernie Sanders and people love our president or whatever, because they feel, people feel there's some authenticity with those individuals, right? Addressing your question about the successes locally, I think, you know, what Qasim mentioned about the prison system, the entire this process of how prisons are being managed and this school to prison pipeline. I think locally, I live in a county which is 70% Black. And when I moved about 28 years ago, it was about 55% Black, right? So now it's changed. And I think what's been happening in our school system, there are a lot of changes that are happening. First of all, you know, they enacted a Black Lives Matter week about a couple of years ago. Recently, there was an initiative to not have armed police officers in school, in high schools, and that's been enacted. And I guess, you know, our state is also, so I think in the school part, there's a lot happening, and I think there are some success stories coming out with what has happened in the last couple of months, particularly with George Floyd part. So our county is changing dramatically. And I think the other part is also, one of the other things happening in our county is judges are being appointed for 15 years term, and they go on ballot. So lately in our county, a lot of judges are being kicked out because judges are not disproportionate. Judges are disproportionately white when the population, when the voters and citizens in the county are changing. So having, you know, a judge who can relate to people, because sometimes, you know, having an African-American judge and, you know, somebody who's being charged with a crime, I think they will probably be able to look at it a little bit more compassionately on that part. So in our county, a lot of judges are being kicked out. So a lot is happening locally in my county.
That's amazing. And also, Salam, I'd like to pass on to you. I'm sure, you know, in the lobbies that you've been doing, and you're very active in your community, and you're working for example, providing food and, you know, the economic imbalances in different societies. Do you have any of those policies that have brought about some sort of, you know, reform and success stories?
Yeah, so sorry for starters, my video's not on. I'm just chasing my son around for bedtime soon. But we had a fight that we were doing at the Virginia Poverty Law Center in the state of Virginia for about 15 years, where we were trying to repeal a very racist law that banned people with drug felonies on their records for life from something called Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps, and also the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, which is the cash welfare program. So if you had a drug felony on your record, you were banned for life from ever getting any type of assistance. And this had a huge disparate impact. This had a huge racial impact because people who have drug felonies on their records are overwhelmingly Black people. And those laws to make those drugs felonies were made with the intent of criminalizing people who are Black. And you see this from Nixon's Southern strategy, where the whole intent was to ruin the Black community. So we see those effects still happening to this day. So for the past 15 years, we worked on a state level in the Legislative Assembly to repeal these bans, and year after year, they would fail in the State House and the Senate. But Alhamdulillah, after I was able to work on this for the past 3 years, and we were able to repeal it after a very, very long fight. And it was a full ban. I mean, it was a full repeal. People would always push for partial repeals. People would push for drug testing as part of the repeal. But these were all really racist things as well, to have a drug testing, for example, to happen, or go through rehab. So this was a no condition attached repeal. And alhamdulillah, over 2,000 families in Virginia that we know of have been affected positively, and overwhelmingly they're Black families.
So these really do change lives by members, regular members like you and I, getting up to be part of the change by knowing the problems in your area, identifying the possible solutions and the people that you need to vote for, the policies that you need to vote in, so that, like you said, thousands of families have been affected. But Qasim, coming to you, you are one of the very few that, instead of voting in for a policy to bring about a change, you put yourself out there to say, you know what, I'm going to be part of the solution in being a decision maker. You're running for Congress. Inshallah, goes the way we are all praying for, you become the first, Ahmadi Muslim congressman. What inspired you, to be part of that? Not just changing the policy or the individuals, but for you yourself to be out there to make the difference.
Well, there's a number of things. For starters, we have beautiful examples in people like Hazrat Muhammad Zafarullah Khan, who comes from a remote village in India and achieves the highest secular positions, President of the International Court of Justice, President of the UN General Assembly, first Foreign Minister of Pakistan. And he did so without compromising his identity or his values. And it was that ability to rise above the injustice and uphold justice as a supreme standard that first kind of indicated to me that even in a time like this, when there is so much corruption, a person who is upholding justice and close to Khalifah al-Masih can achieve lasting results and lasting peace. And even to this day, I'm learning things about him that I had never known. I spoke to a Pakistani scholar who mentioned that in Japan, they have immense love for Hazrat Zafarullah Khan because of his advocacy for the Japanese after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, mind-blowing work that he had done. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is the Islamic aspect, that Islam calls us to uphold justice in all affairs, even if it's against yourself or your own family, that you must uphold justice as that supreme standard. And so this element of justice and maintaining that justice is something that has, I think, been at the core of every Ahmadi Muslim, of every Muslim. They should feel that this is something that should define them. But really, I'm an immigrant to this country. And as you know, in Pakistan, where I was born, we can't vote. We can't run for office. We are living in apartheid type of conditions. And I often think to myself that were I fortunate enough to be a trained and educated lawyer in Pakistan when these types of laws were being passed, what would I have done to protect the rights of all people, to protect the rights of marginalized communities? And then it occurred to me that whatever I am doing right now is what I would have done at that time as well. And so I feel that I'm extraordinarily fortunate, beyond comprehension, to be in this position that I'm in right now, to have attained the education that I've attained, to have had the mentors and the leaders that I've had within the Jamaat and outside the Jamaat, and to have the physical ability, the mental faculties to be able to run for office. And then the final thing is that by the grace of Allah, Jamaat Ahmadiyya has been in the United States for 100 years now, for 100 years. And in those 100 years, even though we were at the forefront of civil rights, at the forefront of racial justice, the forefront of gender equality, 100 years ago, when these concepts were alien in the United States, today we have never had a single Ahmadi Muslim member of Congress. So the final thing was, it's about time. It is about time, and with the prayers of Khalifatul Masih and the efforts of each and every single person here, I believe that we will, inshallah, make that happen.
Inshallah, and our prayers are with you as well, and all, well, people who think like you, people who want to do the right thing, so they can be identified, and they can have the opportunity to bring about these changes. Balanta Saab, people can say, well, you know what, everybody out here, we go out and but we're here talking about minorities. We're here talking about George Floyd and what happened to him and how the policies need to change. But the stats are showing that Black people themselves don't vote, right? So part in the book. What do you think? It's a tough question, but what do you think it would take for Black people to also recognize that, part of the long-standing solution is to change policies and is to change individuals who will bring about that change?
Yeah. I think that that we have our hands full with life, and casting a vote and a ballot, we're not necessarily seeing the relationship between that ballot and the food that we're struggling to put on the table, or our father or brother who's in jail. The last time my people came out en masse was with Barack Obama, and it was because I believe we could see what we were doing, what we were trying to accomplish. We were trying to put and to keep a Black man in the White House. The next voting cycle, everybody was saying that the system is rigged. And that was the first time that I heard white people saying it, when Bernie Sanders was saying it, and even Hillary was saying it. When they said that the system is rigged, I think that our people, it just reaffirmed what we believed all along. And the voter turnout reflected the apathy that we feel in our community. There's a very clear feeling that our vote doesn't really matter. I think that this time, however, with the man in the White House that we have now, and the clear racist policies and intentions and efforts to oppress Black people and to lift white power, I think the Blacks now see it's another clear fight. And so I believe we're coming out again this time because, it's on. You see what I'm saying? We're the kind of people that we have to see what it is. And because if you're fighting a battle, for survival, then the one that you fight to elect Qasim, who's gonna go and fight that fight, that one's two things removed. You see what I'm saying? So our politicians have to make sure that they communicate the message that you have a vested interest in my being elected, and call it just like it is. It's a fight for your very survival. And in that way, I think we'll be more inspired.
Hopefully, I'm as optimistic as you are. We will see, we will see the difference when come November, when it comes to really being part of the change. But as I said, what inspires all of us is, as Qasim has said, as everybody here has said, when we have Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, who is the supreme head of the worldwide Ahmadiyya Muslim community, who consistently has been traveling around the world, meeting individuals, meeting communities, meeting, regular members of society and people of influence, writing to world leaders. For everything that's going on around the world, it takes his on his shoulders. And one of the things that is also taken in his own hands is the problems that America and the world is facing, really. These racial tensions that we see, they aren't new, but of course we're seeing nuances. We're seeing a change in the way racism is happening in America. We're also certainly seeing the way that people are approaching and fighting against this cancer. But as we said, Khalifatul Masih has given us detailed guidelines. And one of those that he was very, very particular about is to bring about, change in the system. Right? And next week for our session, we have a very special guest, and that is the personal secretary of the press secretary of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, Abid Khan Sahib. He will be here with us next week to explain to us, to break down for us all the 13 points that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih sent as guidance to the United States Jamaat. The steps that we all can take, and as he said in those guidelines, that they can bring about real change in the system, and they'll be consistent. So we'll break that down. Abid Khan Sahib will break it down, and he'll explain to us in detail. He'll answer all of our questions. So we will share the form that you can all use to send in your questions beforehand, and on the day as well. If you have questions, you can bring them. It'll be a very open conversation, inshallah, to specifically to Majlis Khuddam al-Ahmadiyya USA. This is a this is a program for Khuddam al-Ahmadiyya USA, and the link will be sent out. New link, not this link for that program. It will be a special link. So I highly encourage everyone to try to participate in that. But one last question that I have, a rapid question, Qasim, by just 2 minutes. If you can again tell us that what's something that we understand, another problem, and I think Abdul Latif Saab touched about it in the beginning, and that is harsher sentences that are given to minorities or Black people. How does that even happen? Again, we're going to your attorney side now, not your politician side, or both, if you wish. Why or how are those policies still in the system when they're so evident? Sorry, Qasim, but you're muted. Oh yeah.
There's a great book I can recommend written by Dr. Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, that she goes into this in depth and kind of breaks down step by step from the first police interaction to the arrest rate, to the charge rate, to the sentence rate, to the parole rate, to what happens afterwards. And so part of the problem is that if you look at every individual circumstance, right? You might arrest a Black person for committing some crime, and maybe they would definitely were committing a crime. And so you can make the argument that, well, they were committing a crime, so we arrest them. Okay, fine. And then you sentence them within the sentencing guidelines, and then they spend time in prison, and then when they're released on parole within a normal range, and then after they're released, they have a certain time that they're on probation. And what ends up happening, one example, is that the white person that goes through the exact same process, first of all, the white person may be stopped by police less often, right? And we know this from studies that police will stop Black and Hispanic drivers sometimes 3 to 5 times more than white drivers for doing the exact same thing. And then after the stop, there's a higher rate of giving a ticket or charging them for something. And then after that, there's a higher rate. And all of this is done through things like subconscious bias. There's certainly a major element of systemic racism and systemic injustice that's involved here as well. And what's happened on the Supreme Court level that's really devastating, that's prevented meaningful reform, is that the Supreme Court has ruled that even if there is a racist result or a discriminatory result, unless you can prove that a law enforcement officer or a judge or a prosecuting attorney is actually racist and has a racist intent, then it doesn't matter. And that's the problem. And the Supreme Court case that decided this was of a Black man who pointed out that he's on death row, and he didn't dispute that he had committed the murder. He didn't dispute that he had committed the crime, but he said that Black people are being sentenced to death at a rate of 35 times that of white people for committing the exact same crime. And that is unjust. That is unfair. And the Supreme Court ruled that, yes, that may be unfair, but you can't prove that you were sentenced to die because you're Black, even though that's the end result. And so the threshold that's being put on activists and on Black people is that you need to now go into the hearts of these officers and these judges and prove that their hearts are corrupt. This is essentially the standard. And it's impossible. And so that's why I go back to, really, this is a question of taqwa. Do we want to create a society that is built on taqwa, it's built on the sense of God consciousness? Because that's really going to be the only ultimate solution. And you can't force that. You can't legislate that. You can't pass a law that fixes that. And that's why I say to my Ahmadi Muslim sisters and brothers that you need to recognize that your role and your responsibility as a servant of Khalifa al-Masih is to serve your country in every sense of the word, and save your country by serving them with such love and compassion that you can melt away these injustices. And that's not going to happen simply by praying. It's going to be a combination of prayer and work. And I know you said rapid response, but this is the last point I'll make about this, Imam Sahib. I'm often reminded of remarks that our beloved Hazur made in Germany some years back, when he said that if all you do is pray, but leave your neighbor who is suffering and let him continue to suffer, then your prayers are worthless. And that's the word that Hazur used, that your prayers are actually worthless if you're not serving your neighbor who is suffering. And so when we see our society around us, there is immense suffering, immense depression, immense addiction issues, immense violence. Our prayers are critical, and they are for us and they are for our community. But as our beloved Master Prophet Muhammad said, that have faith but tie your camel as well. Absolutely. So go out there and take those actions with the conviction and knowledge that with your prayers as your base and your actions, manifesting those prayers, then with the help of Allah Almighty, under the guidance of Khalifa al-Masih, we can bring about this change and end these systemic injustices that Imam Dibba you so eloquently pointed out.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We are right at the mark, or maybe a few seconds ahead. And that's what happens when you tell a politician 2 minutes. But, I'm really appreciative of all the beautiful and excellent comments that you all shared here. I'm sure we're all learning a lot. And I'm very, appreciative to our viewers as well, our audience. As I said, next week is another very special one to look into the guidance that Khalifatul Masih has given us as far as what we can all do, what we should all do, how we should take those, and what our questions are so they can all be answered. So please don't miss those. We'll put out a mass announcement out there with the link, the timing, and everything. It's on Saturday. So on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time next week. So it's Saturday. Mark your calendars, please. But again, this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. This change, we're not saying it's just going to come overnight in these November elections. It's a lifetime commitment to ourselves, to our children, because it took so long for this system to be so rigid in the way it is, for there to be all these, injustices. So it's going to take that much of a time, hopefully less, so that we can bring about the real change, inshallah. So please, all of you, join me in silent prayers, and we'll end tonight's session. Bismillah. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.